is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to another great show on The Bridge on US Arab Radio and also airing and live streaming on Facebook Live. We're going to talk today about a very timely and important topic, social media controversies. We're going to cover shutdowns, regulation, cybersecurity, and cyber warfare. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are two experts in this field. Mr. Mike Sexton is a cybersecurity expert based in Washington, D.C. He was a former fellow and former director of the cyber program at Middle East Institute, and he is now the managing editor of the journal Charged Affairs. And my second guest, Ms. Eliza Campbell, is the current director of the cyber program at Middle East Institute, also an expert in this area. And she was a former Fulbright fellow in Bulgaria, and she speaks several languages, including, but not limited to, English, Arabic, and Spanish. And they both co-edited together the interesting and new book, Cyber War and Cyber Peace in the Middle East, which I also had the pleasure of contributing to. So welcome to the show, Mike and Eliza. We're looking forward to a great discussion today. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Mike, I'll start with you. When the digital heart of the world actually stopped, October 5th, everyone was on their social media and their own devices as usual. All of a sudden, we're trying to send messages on WhatsApp, messages on Facebook and Instagram. Nothing happens. We discover, oh my God, there is this sudden glitch, and these important social media platforms are simply not functioning. Can you give our listeners and viewers everywhere a brief idea what actually happened on that particular day to cause this kind of international global glitch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Facebook, the company, well, I guess now it's Meta, as of yesterday, owns a lot of its own cyber infrastructure, different servers that support the data transferred through Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and so on. And what had happened was the company had pushed out a configuration change in how the servers speak to each other. Which there was an issue with the configuration change that actually cut off data from being transferred. The issue is actually so severe that Facebook's own physical security in the building, the key cards to get in and out of the building, are connected to that same infrastructure. So the people who needed physical access to these server rooms to be able to undo the configuration change couldn't even get in because the configuration change affected their own key card security. So this is why it's why this glitch happened across all of these services simultaneously and why it lasted so long. This is what in risk management we refer to as concentration risk, because so much of global social communication every day goes through these servers that are all centrally managed. That means that one small hiccup like that can cause billions of dollars disruption on a global scale.
Okay, what would be the best way to avoid, to make sure that such a glitch or such a problem, stopping the digital heart of the world, so to speak, does not happen again? Are there any particular measures or any particular, procedures that could be taken in order to ensure that that does not happen again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, one solution that you will definitely hear some people push for would be antitrust legislation to break up Facebook into into different companies. So that way, if you suppose Facebook is down, WhatsApp and Instagram may still be up. Or if WhatsApp is down, people can still talk on Instagram or what have you. This is what happens when so much business is concentrated under just one roof. Something I think may be interesting would be if we consider how large companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google have gotten would be if some governments were to classify these companies as essentially forming a kind of infrastructure in the same way that we do for internet providers like Verizon or Comcast. When you consider how many people use WhatsApp, it is a piece of really global communications infrastructure. And I don't think it would be really such a far-fetched idea to imagine legislation that would require certain rigidity around the way that infrastructure would need to be maintained.
Absolutely. So there are lessons to be learned from this, technical glitch that impacted the whole world. But at the same time, what we actually witnessed, interestingly enough, was the spread of a lot of conspiracy theories and rumors. People were saying, oh my God, this is not just a technical glitch. It is much more than that. Maybe there is, a Russian cyber attack. Maybe some country has, tried to control these, social media giants. There were all of these conspiracy theories floating around. Can you give us an idea about some of these most important conspiracy theories and where they actually came from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, one piece of speculation that I witnessed firsthand was people thinking that this may have been a cyber attack, and considering that this came just as the Facebook files were being leaked. Frances Haugen, the person the whistleblower who's leaked these documents, had just spoken the previous day to 60 Minutes and has since been testifying before Congress. So the impression some people got was that this may be in connection to those files, that it is some sort of retaliation from a hacktivist group like Anonymous. The kind of problem this touches on, I think, is that when it comes to cyber warfare, when we talk about things like, a cyber 9/11 or a cyber Pearl Harbor, it doesn't look necessarily as obvious as planes crashing into a building or a naval base. If right now, speaking to you right now, if my screen just went blank and you didn't hear from me, and I suddenly saw the lights and microwave and everything in my apartment go off, my first thought would not be we're under attack from Russia or China. My first thought would be maybe there was a squirrel chewing on the power line. Power outages happen. Aside from like some events like ransomware, oftentimes these catastrophic effects we consider from cyber warfare look like they could just be, innocent problems with an interconnected society and infrastructure.
Yet people are oftentimes, tempted to jump to these conclusions and to try to create these conspiracy theories, which takes me to the question to you, Eliza, about the spread of misinformation and disinformation. These have been oftentimes connected to cyberspace and connected to social media platforms, right? We have seen, for example, Facebook being accused of spreading misinformation and disinformation that somehow played a role in terms of triggering the attack on the Congress or Capitol Hill on January 6th, and so on. Can you give us an idea about why would we expect these particular social media platforms to come under attack with charges of spreading misinformation and disinformation?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again for having both of us. It's really a pleasure to be reunited with Mike, whose work I'm always looking up to, and to you as well, Sahar. I think if we three can't figure out some of these big questions, I don't know who can as a team. But yeah, I mean, this is a really, really sticky question, and I think it's something that we're likely to see a conversation on, growing slowly, although it really should have started, 10 or 15 years ago, in my opinion. But it seems to have finally sort of reached the public consciousness, especially since 2016, especially since, the January 6th insurrection, so-called insurrection, exploded across social media. It was sort of hard to ignore for the first time. So I think one of the main issues, and Mike, I'm sure will have thoughts on this as well, is that for, many years, I would still say this is the case, sort of the traditional cybersecurity kind of community, both in the US government and in the private sector, generally hasn't really considered the issue of misinformation, disinformation kind of part of their realm of work, with I think good reason. There's obviously a big difference between the kind of critical infrastructure and kind of, systems-based attack that Mike has spoken about, and sort of these stickier social, political phenomena that occur as a result of, people sharing all of their information, all of their opinions in the same place. But I think, and I would make the case that we've come to the point where these systems are connected enough to the way that people use them that the line has become so porous that it's really time to start kind of having these conversations and making these policy decisions within the same realm. So when it comes to the issue of disinformation and misinformation and the spread of conspiracy theories, for example, we know that from some of the leaks and some of the testimony by Frances Haugen, as Mike spoke about, that in fact you can engineer, specifically within Facebook's infrastructure, for example, ways to encourage people toward more conspiratorial ways of thinking. And we know that this has been the case, that more extreme, more angry, more polarizing reactions and information and shares can actually be built into or encouraged on Facebook's platform, and in fact were. So I would make the case that in terms of making these kinds of policy decisions, yes, the technologists may have this, impulse to say, well, go talk to the sociologists, go talk to the psychologists. This is really a human psychology problem. And in some sense, yes, that's true. Humans have always, trafficked in conspiracy theories and myths. That's just, you can go back to ancient history for that. But at the same time, we've never had a company that is interested in prioritizing rage over, information, for example. And we know now from some of these leaks that that's exactly what Facebook did. So I would say that, as soon as you start prioritizing content that really incites a reaction out of people, you're going to incite, an insurrection. That's just kind of how it works. And so I would say that at a baseline, and we can get more into this at a different point, that's probably how we should start thinking about this issue.
And that's the danger exactly of some of the leaks, as you mentioned, like from Frances Haugen, when she was talking about, Facebook putting, profit over public welfare or over, the best interest of its own users. And in so doing, helping the spread of some of this very, very dangerous, polarizing conspiracy theories that led to these horrible, of course, events that we actually witnessed. But Eliza, what would be some of the mechanisms through which we can try to maybe minimize some of the damage or some of the harm when it comes to the spread of such types of misinformation and disinformation, conspiracy theories, and so on, on social media? Are there any certain mechanisms, measures, actions that can help us to do so?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably there are people who are just beginning to, get the ideas for their PhD theses, many, I hope, about this right now. Not only sociologists, but also psychologists, lawyers, antitrust lawyers, as Mike mentioned. I think this really has to be an interdisciplinary effort because it's an inherently interdisciplinary problem. So my hope is, to start, that we'll start having some of these conversations, bringing together more types of systems thinkers, not just programmers, which I think, as we've seen, when you have technologists and programmers kind of building the systems in a vacuum without any consultation from social psychologists, from educators, from, psychologists, for example, that might not be the best option, especially if you're going to deploy these systems on, billions and billions of people without really any idea for how to control for when things might start going wrong. So, Mike has heard me rant about this many times, so apologies. But, obviously there's going to be a lot of conversation. There has been about, tweaks to the very infrastructure of Facebook's model. And I think that those are very, very worthy conversations to have. There are ways to reorient and to, make more transparent Facebook's decision making. Just Facebook as an example, because or Meta, I guess. I'm just going to keep calling it Facebook, to be honest with you. I assume we all will. There are ways to do that in the platform itself, and I think that those are worthy conversations to have, and many civil society groups and scholars have drawn attention to ways that might be done. So things like, being more transparent about ways that decisions around content moderation are taking place, for example, opening the doors to academics and civil society activists to understand more about, Facebook's decision-making in terms of algorithmic decision-making would be great places to start. But, because I can't stop thinking outside of the realm of the Facebook or the technology companies themselves, I would also draw attention to fixes that can be done earlier and in implemented in more types of areas. I think that's going to be necessary as well. So for example, in early childhood education and in secondary education, it could be a really, really important place to start to have, some sort of baseline technology hygiene instruction for students in public schools, so they can understand more about the systems and the internet backbone that they interact with that really forms the basis of their everyday decision making. As Mike said, this might, if you had sort of a baseline understanding of how the backbone of the internet works and why outages happen, I think that could go a long way in terms of kind of helping people to have a less conspiratorial reaction to outages, for example. Absolutely. So I'll stop there, but there are many, many places to start.
Absolutely, and it seems to me that there is definitely a need to have better coordination between these, giants in social media and between, as you said, social scientists, academics, experts, and others. We'll come back to this very interesting and important discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
While we've been staying safe at home, scientists have been on a journey. The destination, a COVID-19 vaccine. This journey began decades ago with research into other coronaviruses. Scientists built from there with months of research and development, cooperation with other experts worldwide, and clinical trials on tens of thousands of volunteers of diverse race, age, and health status. They arrived at a safe, effective vaccine, and hundreds of thousands in Michigan have already been vaccinated. But the next step is ours. We need to get the vaccine when we can. Keep wearing masks correctly and taking precautions until we reach our destination, freedom from COVID-19 and getting back to the lives we love. Discover the facts for yourself at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain. Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frikeh, hoisin, grape leaves with steak, mishawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about a very important and timely topic. We're talking about social media controversies. We're talking about shutdowns. We're talking about regulation and we're talking about cybersecurity and cyber warfare. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are two experts in this field, Mr. Mike Sexton and Ms. Eliza Campbell. So we're coming back to this important discussion with a question that actually was asked by our own member of our team here at US Arab Radio, Adil. He's asking about monopoly. He is saying, what happened on October 5th, in terms of the glitch that we talked about earlier, the stopping of the digital heart of the world, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. And then, of course, as you said, Mike, before taking over of Meta, of all of these companies, is that actually showing us the danger and the threat of the whole notion of monopoly in the field of digital media? What is your take on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that this is absolutely a good example of why monopolies are dangerous, that they create structural risks to the economy and can often provide inferior products to consumers. If you can imagine a smaller, more up and coming social media network that experienced this kind of an outage, it would this serious and sweeping of an outage, it would probably lose some of its user base, but this is much less of a concern for Facebook because it is so integrated into the way that we all operate. I think that if you are someone who perceives Meta as holding a monopoly on social media, that this is a very good example of why that is harmful to consumers.
Absolutely. And whenever such a glitch happens, people freak out, and rightly so, because they are scared and afraid about the privacy of their own information, right? It is not a secret that we all share too much information about our private lives and professional lives and photos and videos and all of that on Instagram, on Facebook, and on WhatsApp. So there's always the threat of invasion of privacy, which makes people really scared and worried. What is your take on this particular point, Mike, in terms of the threat of invasion of privacy on these particular social media platforms?
Mm-hmm. So, there are really kind of two sorts of ways that we need to split thinking about invasions of privacy when it comes to these platforms. The first is in terms of Facebook monetizing user data to be able to market to advertisers by looking at what sorts of things you like and don't like on Facebook, serving you ads that that it believes that you would be interested in based on what your friends are shopping for, based on your personal interests. And the other would be invasions of privacy that actually involve you getting spied on, your private communications that are intended to be completely private, being spied on either by governments or by criminal hackers. So with respect to these two different kind of paradigms of privacy invasions, I don't see much of that being kind of a direct impact of outages like what happened at Facebook earlier this month. I would sort of raise the possibility that so Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp both employ end-to-end encryption in people's chats with one another. And this can oftentimes be an annoyance for law enforcement in the United States and around the world. And there have actually been some spyware companies that rather than try to actually intercept and decrypt those encrypted messages, they will instead sit in the middle of those communications with telecommunications infrastructure and try to disrupt them so that way someone isn't able to get their WhatsApp chat to work with someone, and so they will switch to an unencrypted channel to chat with them, and then the government will be able to intercept those chats in what is known as cryptography as plain text, in what is readable form. So that is something that I would consider, to be a real threat of these outages, is that it provides encryption for free to billions of people around the world, oftentimes in oppressive countries. And when that service is interrupted so completely and for so long, it can force people to rely on unencrypted forms of chat.
And what would be some of the measures, the best measures that can be put in place in order to better protect people's privacy and the privacy of their own private information and sensitive information that they share all the time, day in and day out on these social media platforms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So within these two paradigms, I mean, one would be to be mindful that, anything that you like, that you engage on social media that is not, a private chat with one or two other, or a number of other people, something that you like on Facebook, something that you post on Twitter, you should expect that to be captured and monetized for marketing by someone. As for, having reliable encryption options available, there are a great deal of different encryption apps for chat. There's Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp are the biggest ones, even though people often don't think of them as necessarily encrypted chat. But there's Wickr, WICKR. There's Signal. There are encrypted email services like Proton Mail. There are a lot of these different options. And, my recommendation would be, if someone is really interested in keeping those chats private, to really explore all of these options. Because if I really want to have a private conversation with Eliza and I'm having trouble getting through with her, and I can't get through on Signal, I can go and check and see if she's available on Wickr or some other outlet where I can know that I'm having that conversation safely.
Absolutely. And there's always the issue of the algorithms, like you mentioned before. Like, once you do something on social media, obviously it's being, spotted by someone, and they're going to send you more of the same. And that, in a way, is also somehow conditioning people's minds in so many ways. That really takes me to Eliza's point about, the need for cyber hygiene classes or courses, and I would say also definitely cyber literacy and media literacy. Eliza, every time these big controversies erupt around the role of social media and digital media, the issue of internet regulation always by default comes up. So I get asked the question all the time, what would be the best way and the most effective way to regulate the internet? And my answer is, like, if I had an answer for this question, I'd be like, a billionaire by now or something like that. But maybe you have the chance to become a billionaire by telling us what would be some of the ways through which we can actually navigate this difficult terrain of internet regulation, in your opinion.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, the problem is the answer to this question is definitely not something that would make one a billionaire. And I think that's exactly why people haven't been interested in investing their time in it. Because, there's a lot of ways. It depends on what type of regulation you're talking about, whether you're talking about, the internet service providers that have tremendous sort of price setting and monopoly setting power, or whether you're talking about, the big five sort of tech platforms that we've spoken about, whose business model is really so recent, even though it has been around basically for 20 years, that, legislation has been slow to catch up with exactly what type of, information, what types of profit streams, what type of things they're monetizing, which, as Mike noted, is, our attention. So I think I'll focus, there are lots of different ways to attack this question. The issue of Section 230 reform is one that's been widely discussed and I think is worth discussing as well. But I think my biggest answer here would be the issue of antitrust regulation, essentially. Because these companies, the reason that they've been allowed to become so powerful and the reason that they've been allowed to get to the point where, it's almost like we're asking instead of requiring them to do better, is precisely because of their enormous financial power and because of the fact that there is such a close pipeline, between the smart people who make policy here in Washington and, the people who end up running the tech platforms themselves. So I think I would first call for, some broader thinking about how to more effectively kind of apply an antitrust framework to a lot of the business models of these companies. And also to sort of, as Mike spoke about, a lot of the companies operate essentially as public infrastructure for a lot of people, particularly, in some places around the world where, actual, communications infrastructure may not exist, or channels for open communication may be surveilled or maybe, tightly controlled by oppressive regimes. We saw, I think, the most probably devastating thing as a result of the shutdown earlier this month was the shutdown of WhatsApp, which does form kind of the basis of communication infrastructure, or the only outlet for communication, both in business, education, and beyond for many people in the developing world. So I would start there, I think, in terms of talking about how, these companies might be considered or might be regulated in the manner of public infrastructure, for example. And I think, there's many ways to consider what internet regulation might look like, and I probably won't get into all of them, but I think that would be the basic place where I would start in terms of the conversation that we've been having.
Can you just explain to our listeners and viewers this part about the antitrust laws or regulations? Because I'm not sure it's clear enough to everyone. You can just briefly explain what that exactly means. Eliza, please.
Sure. So this goes back to the era of, the oil barons, the robber barons in, the early 1900s in the US. When companies are allowed to get to the size and the scale of a company like Facebook, they're just, enormous, with hundreds and hundreds of billions of profit per year. This happens for a particular reason, and it happens because there hasn't been a concerted effort to really make sure that competitors are allowed to stay in the marketplace. Because Facebook, especially, or Meta, I guess, in this case, because we are speaking about, the platforms that it's bought up and brought under its wing, like Instagram, WhatsApp, for example, has had the strategy that many tech companies have had of just simply buying up and destroying competitors. And this precisely is what has allowed them to get as big and as unchecked and as powerful as they are, is that they really don't have competition. Mm-hmm. So when, people say things like, oh, if you don't like the way that Facebook monetizes your data, or you don't like the way that, WhatsApp might make you feel insecure about your messages, just use a different platform. You don't have to be on it. Well, the answer is, well, no, I really can't. Like, there really isn't a competing platform of such size and scale with sufficient usership such that I could use it. So that's sort of where the same framework comes from, is the idea that there should be a more competitive marketplace in this arena. It shouldn't just be one, essentially, CEO making decisions for hundreds and billions of users, of customers.
Absolutely. It brings us back full circle to the point about monopoly, right? The monopoly that these big giants have over the market, and therefore you don't have a lot of choices and a lot of options, which is why, of course, there is this call to try to really break them down into smaller entities. But every time we talk about internet regulation, Eliza, there is also the question of the slippery slope, right? Of getting into certain dilemmas and certain difficulties and threats, honestly, some of which are related to the tighter control and, more power to the regimes and governments, especially if you're talking about authoritarian parts of the world. What would be some of the ways to try to balance the best interest of people using these social media giants with also basically trying to avoid some of these dilemmas and some of these threats of possibly, more authoritarian control and digital authoritarianism?
Yeah, I think, there are going to be many, many revelations coming out in the, coming weeks from the Facebook files. I think obviously they provide some insight into Facebook's platforms and tools in particular, which is a really, really important vested chunk of how we should consider this problem. But I think there are lessons from that can be applied sort of broadly to other tech platforms as well. Probably the most shocking revelations for me thus far, although I don't want to jinx it, there could be many more, is the way that, Meta as a company basically really, really under-resourced its thinking around this exact issue, around the fact that its platform and its tools, which were designed in the US, invested in with US dollars, exported with the power of, the US market, were deployed onto so many people around the world without, essentially almost any, forethought for how they would be received, for how they would be used, for the particular cultural, linguistic, political context in which they would be used. So, for example, when it comes to the issue of content moderation, or essentially, how a platform like Facebook or Twitter would sort of apply their terms of use by taking down content that violates their terms of service. That service is extremely under-resourced in English, even as, the most probably dominant language by which the companies or their platforms are used. So when it comes to a language like Arabic, for example, it's extremely under-resourced. And we've seen this in the sweeping mistakes in content moderation or in takedowns that Facebook, for example, has made. There just isn't the person power there to make sure that these decision-making, capabilities are effective. So I would start there with really, investing seriously in the sociological, linguistic, political context for the different issues on which these platforms influence millions, billions of people around the world.
Absolutely. We'll come back to this very important discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Al-Majid Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and another great episode on The Bridge on US Arab Radio and also live streaming on Facebook. We're talking today about a very important and timely topic, social media controversies, covering shutdowns, regulation, cybersecurity, and cyber warfare. With me this morning discussing this important topic are Mr. Mike Sexton and Ms. Eliza Campbell. So, Mike, COVID-19, the pandemic has had a huge impact on all our lives. There's no question about it. One of the areas that has been impacted also has been freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and definitely what is going on in terms of government control on certain digital platforms in an attempt to try to curb the freedom of expression, especially of activists, journalists, and regimes, opponents, and dissidents. What is your take on this particular point, please?
So I think when it comes to the pandemic, especially very early on, you saw a lot of governments had a sort of incentive to suppress news about the pandemic in their own countries to cover up the damage that it reflected on their own public health systems. We saw this first off in China when China was seeking to suppress reporting from doctors who were speaking about flu-like illnesses around Wuhan. We saw this in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia and Iran, Bahrain. A lot of these countries were either seeking to tamp down any conversation about the pandemic in their own countries, or to try to shift the blame for the pandemic onto other countries, whatever happens to be a convenient geopolitical foe for them. A lot of Sunni Arab countries were blaming Iran. We've seen in the United States, a lot of politicians are reacting by placing the blame on China, of which a lot of that blame is valid. But, you know, it does beg the question to me, is this convenient for the government to sort of have a boogeyman to point to? Or is there actually some sort of systematic policy shift that these people are actually advocating for? I would say that it's oftentimes the former. As for, you know, privacy violations for journalists, activists, these sorts of things, I perceive this as kind of a perfect storm, because we've seen the spyware industry has grown and grown for a few years before the pandemic, really, I believe triggered by the ubiquity of encryption on smartphones and different messenger apps. And with the pandemic, once people were no longer able to speak to each other in person, for the most part, a lot of these people had to transition to these apps. And there was this already, by that time, multi-billion-dollar marketplace for hacking tool companies that would be able to surveil those communications.
There is also the applications that governments put in place in terms of contact tracing, you know, surveillance apps that are, you know, somehow saying, okay, we're trying to protect public health. We're going to make sure that you're really safe and healthy by making this kind of contact tracing and surveillance. But in fact, it also poses all types of threats and backdoors for regimes to try to crack down on their opponents. Can you elaborate a little bit, Mike, on this particular aspect, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to contact tracing, there's obviously a public health benefit, especially if you're thinking about earlier on in the pandemic, before the virus had infected, you know, so many people that practically everyone now knows someone who's been infected, at least. Earlier on, you know, knowing that someone tested positive, went to a supermarket, and then seeing who else was at that supermarket at that time and may have been infected, there's obviously a great benefit to that in terms of public health. But it also does pose the concern if that government does not have good protections around that data to make sure that it's only held by, you know, the Ministry of Health or the National Institute of Health in the United States. If that is being accessed by the police as well, we saw this happen in Israel, where the Supreme Court of Israel had ruled that the police should not have access to this data because, you know, it then becomes an infringement upon their civil liberties. Because if someone was meeting with someone for, you know, the purposes of just, you know, freedom of expression and of congregation, you know, that should not be infringed by law enforcement under the guise of public health.
Absolutely. It opens so many back doors for this new era or new phase of digital authoritarianism. That's for sure. And that is a threat, especially in regions and parts of the world where there is more of autocratic and authoritarian regimes. But there is also a social aspect to this whole crisis as well. Eliza, you know, me and you have authored or co-authored a piece on the gender digital gap in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And definitely there has been inequities and injustices, right, and discrepancies that somehow escalated and widened in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic based on, you know, gender, location, socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity, you name it. Can you elaborate a little bit on this particular social aspect of the digital gap, somehow from the social aspect, please?
Yeah, of course. You know, as you and I have talked about, it very much is the case that, you know, internet-enabled tools can be a great equalizer, particularly for places in the world where women and different kinds of, you know, lower income people don't have access to the same opportunities or the same education that might be available to others. But at the same time, you know, they can also exacerbate those existing inequalities. We've seen that women, particularly in the Middle East, tend to be much less digitally enabled or have digital access as compared to the men in their families and in their lives. And I think, as more and more parts of life, including education, professional life, even access to, critical health, public information, as Mike spoke about, moved online, with it, the inequalities and the injustices in access that existed in the real world moved onto the digital world as well. So I would really draw attention to the need for, social media companies to, build in ways to push back on these inequalities into their tools. And for, development agencies and for, educational and nonprofit entities that are working on the issue of education and, development, particularly among women in different parts of the developing world, to really make an active effort in investing in this area of work as well, in teaching more women about digital hygiene, for example, about, drawing attention to the inequalities in digital access that exist. I'm really interested, for example, to see, post-Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, how different aid agencies and different, entities working with women in that country will make sure to note, how differential access to the internet is impacting and will continue to impact health, well-being, education outcomes for women in particular. It's very much the case that we've seen, the inequalities that exist in the real world are just going to replicate themselves online. But at the same time, there is, as you and I have noted, a tremendous kind of potential for transformation if it's done smartly and with good policy making in mind from the beginning.
Absolutely brings us back full circle to the point about the need for digital literacy to become an international phenomena, and media literacy for sure. But otherwise, we're seeing really a widening of the digital gap between the technological haves and have-nots in many parts of the world, based on so many demographic and geographic variables. Mike, we have been witnessing the congressional hearings with the social media giants being asked, the executives from these big social media giants being asked questions by senators, by members of the US Congress. What is your take on these particular hearings recently, and what did really strike you in terms of these hearings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think on the one hand, these hearings are a really good opportunity for members of Congress and for the general public to examine these questions of whether Meta is a monopoly and what harms that may have for the consumer. There's undoubtedly, I think, some room to investigate the ways that Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp are used by minors, by teenagers, and have their information collected. I think that it absolutely makes sense that when we learn that that Meta is interested in using these services and surveillance capitalist techniques to gather data on minors to then, make sure that they get looped into these social networks and become lifelong consumers of it. There's obviously, I think, a concern that, a 13-year-old or, even an 11-year-old can't really give informed consent to these companies to collect that information when they are so young. And there's also the question, of course, of balancing, the privacy of a teenager who's, growing up and may want to keep some things private from their parents, but, share that over social media with close friends. There are a lot of questions here, I think, around, legislation that respects the privacy of minors, as well as the rights of the parents to supervise their children. One thing I would just say is that, as much as I think that there's a great deal that Facebook needs to do to improve, I do personally worry that Congress may not necessarily have the financial or the technological literacy to be an effective mechanism to regulate these organizations. We saw this, I believe it was Dick Blumenthal during a hearing had asked Instagram if it would be shutting down what is known as Finsta, which is essentially a term that that people will use for individuals who will have a sort of public-facing Instagram and then a private Instagram where they're not identifiable, but where they can share more personal and private things. Teenagers use this. I've even heard of members of royal families using this. Obviously, a good reason why. If you're a member of a royal family, you have a lot of eyes on you, but you also have a lot of friends that you probably want to be real and vulnerable with. So it does concern me, when a member of Congress is asking someone from Facebook whether they're going to be shutting down Finsta, as I believe it was Dick Blumenthal had asked, that these people are not really fit to be stepping in and legislating these decisions. So to me, I see a lot of kind of an echo of the way in the 1990s with the Communications Decency Act, the sections besides 230 were oftentimes aimed at legislating to prevent children from using the internet and accessing pornography, which is obviously, I think, a very, reasonable policy goal to have, but it does also raise concerns about constitutionality, about freedom of speech. What should the government be able to step in to stop you from posting what you want on the internet, even if it is explicit, if it's something children shouldn't see. So, I mean, that's kind of my concern about the way I see a lot of Congress and a lot of discussion interested in kind of regulating these issues. That makes me worry, I think, about the constitutional strength and the actual practical impacts that these decisions would have.
Yes, I very much agree. And it brings us back full circle to the whole dilemmas around the notion of internet regulation and how much role the government should or shouldn't have in regulating or in trying to maintain some standards for these social media platforms. We'll come back to this important and timely discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Are you going to start a restaurant or a grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. We are discussing today a very important and timely topic, social media controversies. We're talking about shutdowns, internet regulation, cybersecurity, and cyber warfare. And with me this morning discussing this important topic are two experts in this field, Mr. Mike Sexton and Ms. Eliza Campbell. Eliza, part of what has been discussed in these congressional hearings had to do also with the safety and welfare of children and teenagers. It is no secret that these are the largest number of users of these social media platforms. They fall in this particular demographic category. As if you can tell us briefly, please, what is your take on whether these social media platforms or giants are doing enough in order to actually protect the safety and welfare of this particular category of users?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more or less a resounding no at this point. These are some of the youngest and most vulnerable users. Facebook platforms like Meta and Twitter are trying to lock in teenagers and young people as quickly as possible. They're very aware that, their business model is changing, and to lock in younger users is really critical to their survival. And they're doing that by increasing engagement in ways that can be really unhealthy and really unsafe. So I would say in general that hasn't been the case, but it's critical at this stage for the companies to pay much more attention to ways that child safety and security have to be built into their business model.
Absolutely, and maybe there is also a way to bring together also some experts, maybe social scientists, scholars, sociologists, as well as parents, right? Like maybe parental controls and parental regulation can also be brought into the mix here to better safeguard the best interest of this particular vulnerable category of children and teenagers. The last point we're going to be discussing today in our few remaining moments here in the program is this whole notion of cyber warfare, right? So now we're saying, okay, these digital world, these digital giants, they're also opening the door for cyber war or cyber warfare. So Mike, internationally speaking, how are you seeing the development or the future of this particular dangerous area of cyber warfare? Briefly, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that one way that we need to kind of distinguish or change the way that we think about cyber warfare is to stop imagining this as kind of just a new domain that is that is in any way equivalent to, land, sea, and air warfare. Cyber warfare is something that we kind of call, gray zone conflict or below the threshold, in that it's something that states often rely upon to carry out a very measured response. We've seen this, for example, after the North Korean government had hacked Sony Pictures, and the United States carried out a hack against the North Korean government in retaliation for this. And there's a very distinctive kind of psychological impact that has compared to if the United States were to send, an aerial bomber to bomb North Korean government offices, which would, pretty inarguably be a declaration of war and cause a great deal of harm, because cyber warfare almost never actually results in human casualties or physical destruction. It is something that is often used, we should think of it as more akin to espionage in terms of something that states do to one another, but that is not the same thing as going to war.
Absolutely, and I would also assume that our region, the Middle East region and the Arab world, will definitely have its share of this kind of cyber warfare as well. In less than half a minute, Eliza, what's your takes quickly on, the shape or the future of cyber wars in this part of the world, the Middle East and the Arab world in particular?
Yeah, just really quickly, I'll mention that I think the component of information security is going to be an increasingly important one. Sowing fear, disinformation online is as related to cyber warfare as anything else and should be considered part of that whole portfolio.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm afraid we're running out of time. I would like to very much thank our guests today, Mr. Mike Sexton and Ms. Eliza Campbell, for this excellent conversation and great insight. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. It was really great to be here.
Thank you. And thanks to all our listeners and viewers everywhere. And thanks to the great US Arab Radio team. Take care, and we'll see you again next month. Goodbye.